What's a talisman? How do you make a talisman? Are there any risks in purchasing a talisman that's not been made with utmost care? All of these are questions that I asked Kaitlin Coppock, the Instagram star and creator of Sphere and Sundry, probably the world's most recognized and most well-respected company that make highly elected talismans. And what does highly elected even mean? The answer to this and many other questions are what you can look forward to over the next 40 minutes in this lovely interview with Kaitlin Coppock herself. I hope you enjoy the video. And now I present to you Kaitlin Coppock of Sphere and Sundry. What an absolute honor to meet you at last, Kaitlin. You know, we've been conversing for, what has it been? Like almost 2 years? It certainly feels like a long time, right?
It does. And I think we started planning maybe doing this back in October, and then things just kind of kept revolving. And I'm so grateful to connect with you at long last. This is a terrifying opportunity. I've only ever done one podcast before, and it was like 4 years ago.
That was a massive influence for me, and it's the basis for that video that I made on talismans, for which I'm incredibly grateful for that information that you just shared so clearly with the world. It really made talismans very, very easy for me to understand. Maybe, Kaitlin, actually, for people who are watching who are quite new to the idea of a talisman, and could you elucidate for us, what is a talisman?
So, a talisman is an item of power. It's usually a ring or a necklace or something like that. And you can make them out of stones that you, for instance, carve at the time, or you can cast them in metal, or you can carve into metal. And they're highly, highly astrologically elected as far as this tradition goes. Astrology is so popular right now. Everyone is kind of used to getting the weekly update, and people can try and put a good spin on it. But a lot of people probably taken away by now that there's always something. There's always, Mercury's retrograde, Mars is in Cancer, this lunation's an eclipse, whatever it is. And so those really amazing moments that are worth keeping, that are worth ensouling in a gem that you're going to wear for the rest of your life, are few and far between. And it's not even just that you need Venus in Libra, for instance. It's that you need Venus in Libra while she's not being afflicted by any malefics, and preferably while the moon is aspecting her and the moon itself is in great condition and not being afflicted by malefics. And the ruler of the ascendant, which changes every 2 hours, has to be in good condition. Preferably Venus is configured to it. The power that you're looking to capture can also be on the midheaven, but the ascendant, because it rules the body of the talisman, you always have to look at the condition of the ascendant as well. And then on top of all of that, you have to get the right planetary hour, which changes all the time. So the slimmest margin we ever had for a Sphere and Sundry working was 12 minutes. That was luminous crown, where all of those factors aligned. And then the longest I've ever gotten is maybe an hour. And so you're really cherry picking the finest window of time, where not only is the power that you're courting in exceptional condition, but it's also in a position for the human, the mage, the priest, the priestess, to connect it to life on Earth. Because if it's walking past a building, but there's no window or there's no door, you're going to have a hard time getting it in there and yes, kind of seeing it. So that's the idea with the planet needing to be on the ascendant or the midheaven, is like, can you connect with it? Is it beaming? Are we on the same wavelength, essentially? So those moments are really rare, and they don't even happen every year. So like there were 3 major elections this year that would have been fantastic to get. The elections were just not up to snuff for what we needed. When the sun was in Aries, Mars was in Cancer. And even an exalted planet is really hamstrung by a ruler that can't rise to the occasion. So we passed on that. Venus in Taurus was being afflicted by Rahu and Uranus. And so these aren't even things that can happen every year when someone thinks, oh, well, when Venus goes into this sign, I'll get one. That being said, if people are getting started with this, and I do recommend that they do, it's really rewarding and wonderful, but I would recommend starting with paper. If you're unsure of how a talisman is going to work, you're not positive whether your election is good enough for keeping forever,
Mm.
start with creating talismans on, high-end parchment, something like that, or a stone that you can break. I've definitely broken some talismans in my day. There's one in a sewer grate in Chicago. Each moment of time is so specific. You can say things about, well, this is what Venus and Taurus is like.
Mm.
But we've done a couple different Venus and Tauruses. We've done a couple different Venus and Libras. They all still have their own vibe because the moon's going to be somewhere different. It's going to be on the ascendant, or it's going to be on the midheaven. In the midheaven, it could be in the 11th, the 9th, or the 10th. So yeah, they all have their own personalities, and you can have theories, but it really takes working with them and building the relationship to understand exactly what that one's like.
Because it's about when that object is born, just like with
Mm-hmm.
people, it's about when they're born, and they keep with them that energy, right, of that moment.
Yes, absolutely. So fumigation, which is just the fancy word for like smoke bathing stuff in incense, is such an important part of the talismanic process, the ritual process. And I
Mm.
like to think of that as basically the breath of that spirit that you're giving whatever you just created breath, because that's kind of when a child is born, is when it takes its first breath. It's of this ether now.
Oh, that's so nice.
All of my stuff was derived and cultivated from just adapting things that I found in the Picatrix originally. And the talismanic process is really cool and really quite simple.
Mm.
Um, you need to plan your space. And, you can go as all out with that as I do, or you can do something pretty simple in just whatever temple you have. And also magic can be done on the fly. But the thing about talismanic workings is you got to rise to the occasion of the moment. So the more you make of it, the more
Of
attention you're going to
course.
get from the planet or the star. And so they say dress up in a way that the planet will recognize. So you're trying to ingratiate yourself, and you're kind of like,
Mm.
Jupiter, I'm dressed as a priest. What do you think? Because Jupiter loves priests. So the thing with the election is you want to approach anything powerful when they're in a good mood, when they're
Mm.
in a position to provide for you. So that's
Mm.
the core thing about the election. And then also, you want to ask for what that thing is also capable of providing. So you need to know what these stars and what these planets actually offer so that you can know what to ask for.
Mm.
Um, but then it's kind of like showing up for a date.
Mm.
You're going to dress in a way that you think will please or impress the power. And so that can involve wearing the right colors. It can involve, if you're doing a Venus working, putting makeup on and doing your hair. If it's a Saturn
Mm.
working, you can show up stinky and covered in ash. They all like different things. And so you set up the temple space, you set up yourself. I'm really big on energetic cleansing and ritual bathing. So typically before I come into a working, I'm doing that and using materia from that sphere or a compatible one to like sort of pre-attune and clear the field of things that aren't part of the working. And then when it's go time, typically I'm lighting the candles first, and then I'm lighting the incense, and then you read the address. So it's a little bit like it's very like the glory of Caesar. A lot of them,
Mm.
it's like, oh Venus, you who are stunning, you who are beautiful and bring all good things, you who are coated in flowers and all the rest, scented oils, and so you kind of spend probably at least 5 minutes just exalting them and giving them praise, and you can read those addresses from the Picatrix. The Hygromantia has some. You could write your own.
Sure.
Oftentimes, what we do is we'll kind of use something stock because we figure that the tradition recognizes some of that stuff,
Mm.
and then we'll segue into something that was prepared and written, and then after the main address, that's when I go into what I want, what I'm asking for.
Mm.
So bless and empower these herbs. Make me and this materia created in your name an avatar of yourself and your will on this earth. You, as you are in this condition, bring, these things. And then I kind of continue riffing and continuing to pray as I'm going through the motions. And some aspects take more focus than others. So for instance, if you're actually making a talisman, you might not be muttering prayers that much when you're focused on trying to get your
Of
lines right
course.
or something. But when you're doing herbs and other things like that, and you're just sort of incensing a lot, you can
Hmm.
really throw yourself into the moment. And that's what I refer to as kind of like prayers from the altar of the heart, like as you're moved, and it helps if you
So of
mean it.
course, that's right. And this is exactly what I was going to say. You need to have a deep understanding of the powers that you're addressing so that you can riff in the right way, of course, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
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 and
yeah.
know what you want and know what you're asking for coming in, and think about it. So there is planning necessary with talismanic workings at their best. And
Mm.
another aspect of the planning, if you are trying to create actual talismans, for instance, would be getting your design right. And if
Mm.
you're doing them on cabochons or something like that, I really like using a gold or a silver or a black paint pen to pre-draw my lines.
Hmm.
And that way you're not as concerned with being an artiste in the moment, because it starts getting very like the pressure's on when you've got 12 to 45 minutes to do something.
Yes,
And if you're
yes.
worried about like, oh, does that look like a frog? I don't know. So you kind of do that the night before or something like that.
Sure.
You kind of create your templates for yourself so that you take some of the pressure off yourself and make sure that the end result is as you want it. So then once you're done with your stuff, when your talismanic window closes,
Mm.
you stop. Sometimes there are harder stops than others. Maybe the ascendant changes and all of a sudden you've got Mars on the rising and you're doing a Mercury working and you don't want any Mars in that
Of
working.
course.
If you've got long processes, the start is the most important,
Mm.
but try to do everything of actual consequence, especially the fumigation, during the real window, and set an alarm for yourself so you know when to stop. And
So
then,
yes, with these very short windows, that must be quite a lot of pressure.
yes, you get better at it, like anything.
Sure, sure.
But at first it can feel very stumbly because you're
Mm.
like you're performing for the planet or the star, and you feel very on stage essentially. But once you are done, you don't have to blow the altar out right away. You could actually leave it. A lot of them will have really, really good energy afterwards. And it's
Mm.
kind of nice to just bask in that and let it
Mm.
infuse your house, let it infuse your
Mm.
temple, depending on what the working is. You just don't want to make anything that actually will have the talismanic charge after. And then you want to stow it away from light, because light carries other astral influences. I really like putting things to gestate or incubate for at least a full lunar cycle from its creation before you start analyzing it to see if it worked. And like, don't disturb it. It takes things a while to just
Mm.
become themselves. If you also made herbal matter, putting your talismans to rest in the herbal matter, kind of burying it, is fantastic. You can wrap it in cloth, keep it in a place of honor and privilege, and then just forget about it for 28 days. It's a
Mm.
little bit like sigils, where I don't think that it helps the process for your energy to be super
Hmm.
involved with it while it's just doing
Yes.
its own thing. And doing this is going to ensure that the charge really sets and that you get something potent when you unearth it later.
I love what you just said. That's absolutely my experience, actually, of creating anything magical. I finish with it, and it's nice, but then when I come back to it a month later or 2 months later, it's, oh my word, this is
Yes.
much nicer than I remembered. Kind of thing, right? It's okay, this is something powerful. So that little gestation period is important.
It is. And the same applies for talismans that are in use a lot. People ask sometimes about do I have to recharge talismans? How do I kind of keep them juicy? And one of the main ways is just to put it back to bed for a while and let itself
Mm.
regenerate. So I like
Mm.
having multiple talismans of the same power to kind of revolve them out. And then you're
Mm.
always working with something that's fresh and that's ready to go to work, so to speak. Another way is to keep them on compatible altars, because the altar and the talisman juices itself
Mm.
and one another. And so the more that their field has to kind of like fend for themselves in the world, the more almost like tired they can get. Same goes for materia that matches a series or matches a talisman that you put on to support and further attune that talisman. The talisman itself doesn't have to do as much heavy lifting in your field. You kind of become an altar in a way, and
Mm.
you're just
Yes.
carrying that energy, and it helps potentiate the talisman's ability to act on your behalf. So with talismanic materia, it's really just a way of like compounding and building strength and fortification into different layers of the magical experience,
Mm.
all toward the same end. And you
Mm.
can use it in spell work too. And in my book, I've got more information on how to incorporate talismans in spell work. But largely speaking, it's just been something that you're kind of either wearing or you're not. And with materia, you can involve it in all kinds of other ritual processes. And it's like an astrology hack, because usually when a magician is doing a working, it's not the perfect time for that working. I mean, talismanic materia, it's a bottled election. So you can kind of create this artificial energetic snow globe of that perfect moment and invite that energy into the process, whatever magical thing you're trying to achieve. And so it's just infinitely applicable to basically anything. It's super practical, and it just 10x's whatever you're already doing. I love using it for activating sigils. I love using it as part of the energy clearing process. I mean, yeah, they're celestial supplements of the highest order, and I
Mm.
think any magician who hasn't tried it yet is kind of just missing out on some really good magical technology more than anything. It's not that you can't do all of this, do your magic yourself. It's just like, do you want to do it the hard way every time or not?
Use some tools. Yes,
Yeah.
right, right. And I love the way your website just shows every step of the process that you go through. And it's not just the process, but the reasons for the process. And it's just such a joy to read the way you got to each particular product at the end. Absolutely a delight to read about that. Do you enjoy writing those?
I don't enjoy writing them. I enjoy reading them later. But the other reason too that all of them are so involved, so there's the teaching component, but then there's also just showcasing how the magical journey goes, kind of like your Mercury retrograde story that you just came out
Yes.
with. And when people are getting into magic and they don't quite know how to be magic yet, or how a
Mm.
magician moves through the world,
Hmm.
all of these workings, first and foremost, are workings. Like that we sell the product is, a new end result. But the making of magic all looks really similar overall. It's like looking for the waymarks that confirm that your work is happening. You're getting the synchronicities. So I really wanted to show how that looks, so that if people see that in their life, they can understand that it's part of the confirmation that they're doing it right.
That's wonderful. I really like everything you just said, Kaitlin. But there's something that's on my mind. I want to know a little bit more about Opus.
Okay. Opus. So,
Can you share?
oh my gosh, did you look through the pictures?
Oh my goodness, yes, I did. I've read the whole thing. Oh wow.
So, this thing that I've been calling Opus for the last month or two. It's actually the Thema Mundi series. The Thema Mundi chart is the mythical birth chart of the universe or the cosmos or the world. It was used as a teaching schema in Hellenistic astrology, so it's very old. And it's where we get all of the planetary rulerships from and what the aspects mean. So there's a lot of wisdom in this chart. And I realized really early on when we were doing Sphere and Sundry, I was high in the shower and I was thinking about the Thema Mundi and I was like, oh my God, I can get every placement of the Thema Mundi because I thought of it now. If I had thought of it a year later, I wouldn't have been able to do it because of needing to get Jupiter in Sagittarius, which it takes 12 years to go through the zodiac, and Saturn in Capricorn, which takes 28 years to go through the zodiac. So basically, this is a huge working. It's kind of a historic working that other people will recreate when they get the opportunity. And it took about 5 years of working toward it to collect all of the individual placements in it. It has Cancer rising and then a Cancer moon, Sun in Leo, Mercury in Virgo, Venus in Libra, Mars in Scorpio, Jupiter in Sagittarius, and Saturn in Capricorn. And then
lined up, right?
Yes. And then Thanksgiving last year of 2022, once I had all of the individual components, I locked myself up at Sphere and Sundry headquarters and I did a bout of magical cloister and just integrated all of those individual components over the course of 7 days ritual. And the result is the Thema Mundi series. And it is very, very powerful. And Sphere and Sundry is known for that already, but this is just on a whole nother level. It's being
chart
handled
of the universe.
Yeah, it's like it kind of, I mean, it's a game changer, but it's perfect because Talismanic Materia overall is kind of feels like a game changer in a world where we're not getting that many new magical technologies necessarily. The way that it's being used now is just a giant leap. And so it's almost like the flooding of the Nile or something in terms of astro magic, and the Thema Mundi just kind of perfectly fits into that. And in a way, I don't really think that there's any going back with how astrological magicians think about these things and how they continue working into and over time, because it's just so valuable for human flourishing and for making these relationships with the planets and stars so very alive. And the sensation of the Thema Mundi materia is completely transcendent. It's almost psychedelic. And then other times you'll put it on and it won't do hardly anything. It has its own intelligence and it gives you what you need. And I think to a certain degree, a lot of this stuff pushes us to improve, because when you're operating with a power at its peak performance, it has very high expectations. And so all this stuff at the end of the day is also kind of tools for personal development, because it forces you to become like worthy of the empowerments you seek, essentially. And so with Thema Mundi, there's just such an intelligence and a primordial one behind all of those influences together, that you're really tapping into something that is not only so much bigger than we are, but also inclusive of all 7 planets and at the same level. I mean, it's like being part of a board meeting where all 7 people are just beasts.
It just sounds so enormous. It just sounds so beyond enormous. And this opportunity doesn't come up that often, right? The opportunity to capture this chart.
Someone who wanted to recreate this working would have to wait until after 2052 to do it correctly. Right. Because you need to get Saturn in Capricorn, and you need to wait until Saturn leaves Capricorn to actually start creating it with a Cancer rising in an ideal world. So yeah, I mean, I kind of consider it the great work of my form of astro magistry. I'm very proud of it. I'm really glad that it finally came together, because I've just been like living for this for the last
Yes.
5 years, and so excited and wondering if it would really come together and how will it feel after and all of it. And I'm still very much in the trenches of bringing it into being, because how Sphere and Sundry normally works is by the time a series has launched, we're ready to start shipping it and it all goes out immediately. And with this, it's the only thing we've ever put on pre-order, because I'm bottling it to order, and I'm bottling everything personally. And it's in really expensive imported violet glass from Europe that'll help keep it, fresh for a decade or more. And it's just such like a privilege and an honor to be the person that did it, that got to do it.
Yes, I can imagine. I mean, Opus is the right code name for it. There's no question about that.
Yeah,
I was
I'll never do
inspired.
anything as cool. I'll never do anything as cool. I can just like hang up my hat now. But now I can focus on the book and helping teach other people and things like that. So it's kind of this particular arc. And I guess what I didn't know would be a career to a certain degree.
So the materia that an advanced or an established practitioner should be getting from Sphere and Sundry, at least right now, while there still is any, is quite clear. What would you suggest for someone just getting started out? Obviously, your write-ups on the website are so clear and so engaging that most people will probably just get a feel for themselves of what is right for themselves, right? But is there one of your materia that you can recommend to somebody who's just not really sure where to start, but I want to try something that's going to work for me, something that I can't deny?
The thing that's, so that's a really good question. Thank you for asking. And it's
It's
actually
a
a harder
terrible
question.
question.
Well,
Yeah.
but it's one everyone asks. And the world of Sphere and Sundry, if you're just coming into it, is really big. There's a lot to catch up on. Some of these write-ups are very long. They're technically involved. So I'm working on putting together a list of astrologers who know enough about all of this to be able to look at your chart and recommend the most remedial influences for you. Austin has his graduates listed on his website. That's a good place to start. Freedom Cole has Vedic astrologers that we're kind of onboarding into this process soon. So if you're really in doubt, you can go that route and you can get a prescription from someone who understands enough about how all of this works and enough about astrological remediation, and they're trained in it. I really like Asclepius for a starter influence. Asclepius is a god of healing, the divine physician, but he also has a lot to do with magical empowerments and facilitating dream contact with gods and spirits and things like that. So Asclepius, I mean, you know this because of your background in developing yourself as a magical practitioner. Banishing is usually a big part, and cleansing, like just preparing the vessel. And Asclepius really helps support that process of creating a slate and a vessel that can run these influences, because a lot of getting started is needing to slough off the stuff that no longer serves you and kind of unclog. It's almost like lymphatic drainage, but for like every sphere, or whatever powers you want to work with. If you can't run the power, you can get backups in various areas of your life or your body, and you can get feedback. So that's also part of why the spectrum of materia goes from, bath salts to help clear, and then colonias to help clear the energy. And so when you're getting started with something, starting with the cleansing stuff and giving yourself micro doses really helps lead to better outcomes as you work your way up to anointing oil, which is typically the most powerful thing in a series. But Asclepius is a wonderful starter thing because it supports physical health and spiritual health and hygiene. And it's a great primer for all magical influences. That'll be our next release. Other than that, Benefics are always a great place to start. And the same is true if you're going to get started personally, working with benefics. Typically the blowback just isn't going to be that bad. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff to choose from. And I don't know necessarily. So to be honest, the only two people that have used Thema Mundi yet are myself and Austin. And so it'll be really curious to see how it hits people at various levels of development. I mean, that's bold. That's jumping in the deep end. If someone's never tried anything Sphere Sundry before, and then they pre-order Thema Mundi anointing oil, definitely let me know how it goes. I think though that it's going to be remarkably safe for what it is.
Very, very nice. And just for those viewers who would be approaching Sphere and Sundry with this very beginner attitude, they might not know what a benefic might be.
The benefics are Jupiter and Venus. And that kind of brings me to something else I wanted to mention, which is astrological magic. I think I might have already said it earlier, but it's the astrology and it's the magic. And a lot of people aren't necessarily bringing both to bear with that. You have to have really technically amazing astrology to understand enough about these planets and what puts them in good condition and everything like that. And then you also have to have the magical experience to be able to conduct that power, get its attention. It's kind of a high bar to entry. And I am trying to make that easier for people to just learn what should be good for them. But that's also why we try to make sure that everything is pretty safe to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're starting with something gnarlier, hopefully, I mean, also just, I would say, pay attention. And you've got to try to work with it too. We live in this kind of like take a pill culture. And that'll fix it. And this is kind of as close as you can get to taking an astromagical pill, but also you've got to be a good dance partner. You've got to be willing to, like, if something's not working, figure out what you can do on your end of the relationship, what channels you need to clear, what life changes you need to make. Because a lot of times these things are essentially initiatic and they will demand change from you. And if you're not willing to change, you're not going to get the benefits.
That's right. Because you're approaching this materia with your own birth chart, of course, and you're mixing your own birth chart with the birth chart of the talisman.
Absolutely.
Right. By the way, can you elucidate for me the difference between talismanic, telesmatic? How are we using these terms?
Yes. Yeah. The elephant in the room. I actually brought my little elephant figurine to help field this question. So when I began, there wasn't a whole lot of ritually crafted, highly astrologically elected anything on the market as far as I knew. And so there was a lot of stuff, a lot of planetary oils, a lot of curios. A lot of it kind of came from like the hoodoo conjure tradition, like where you'd get lucky mojo stuff. And since Austin and I had been working with our jeweler, Tony, on personal projects for so long, at least a decade by the time I started Sphere Sundry in 2018. And then over time, I started making other stuff, like doing the witchy things as part of it. So to differentiate what I was doing from what was kind of a really flooded market, I started calling it Talismanic Materia to indicate that it was a product of the talismanic process and an emanation of the talismanic tradition. So if we currently called talismans, I would have called it talismatic. Because at the time too, there was a lot of, I think Sephora had just launched witch kits or something. And there was a lot. It was like back then, it wasn't like people freaking out over the witches of TikTok. It was people freaking out over the witches of Instagram. And when I took Sphere and Sundry to Instagram, I kind of got a lot of like side eye. And I'm like, I don't know that you have to decide either or. Like, if people are buying magic, why isn't it being made by professionals who know what they're doing? And where it just is 10 times more potent than something that isn't astrologically elected and isn't ritually crafted. So the short answer is just that it distinguished what was not a product of the talismanic tradition as far as the marketplace was concerned. So it was just kind of an easy way to refer to it.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait.
So
Well,
either
that's
or.
okay. I appreciate that clarity. Thank you. Would you say that there's any danger, for example, if somebody's looking for a talisman and they see Sphere and Sundry's products and maybe they don't understand what's actually involved, what the process has been? They don't necessarily understand that they're not just buying a little pot of honey. They're buying an actual talisman, right? And Sphere and Sundry has got all kinds of different price ranges, some extremely affordable products on the one end of the spectrum and some much more luxurious products on the other end of the spectrum. But some people might come to this and think to themselves, well, I don't want to buy a small quantity of a liquid which is going to come to an end at some point. Although I now realize, having been using the products for a year, I'm nowhere near even scratching the surface. This is how potent they actually are. They will last for decades, I'm actually pretty sure. So somebody looking at your products and thinking to themselves, well, I actually want an actual jewel which will last forever. I'm going to go on Etsy and I'm just going to buy this one that says that it's going to make me loads of money and let's go. And they don't necessarily understand what's involved in making a talisman. And yeah, so what would you say to those customers?
Well, one of the reasons that I'm doing this, other than I'm really excited to meet you and talk with you, but we could have done that without recording it, is because just kind of trying to build a little bit of awareness about it, because the only thing that there is as far as regulation, it's just what your reputation is, and it's just the things that you teach people. And I've been working on my book, but there's been a lot going on. I kind of haven't slept for 5 years. So now that I've kind of proven that it works, because when I first came out too, there were a lot of people that were like, that doesn't work, that's not a thing, that doesn't exist. And I was like, I'm just saying that it's the method that makes talismanic magic powerful. It's very manifesty, for lack of a better word. Astrological magic, because astrology is already governing so many elements of our life and our experience, when you start involving those powers in your magic in a real way, a lot of things just happen. And it also takes years to kind of fully flourish. You don't really see exactly what the results of a talismanic operation will be like a couple weeks later. Maybe like best case scenario is it's a waste of money. Worst case scenario is you're making your life worse. A botched Mercury talisman or talismanic oil will actually break your computer instead of fixing it. A botched Venus talisman will bring on like maybe an encounter that you really don't enjoy, unwanted attention, and just make relationships worse. So it's not a low risk form of magic, and because Sphere and Sundry, our stuff, safety is the big thing for that, because we know it's for market. So we're not really going out on too many limbs as far as what we think is going to work well and consistently for people. It gives people the impression that that's how all of it's going to be. And over the next few years, I anticipate that people are going to start learning that that's not so much the case. Yeah, the time has really come for talismanic magic and astrological magic. And it's really cool to see, because for so long, it was a thing that we just kind of did for a decade on our own, and we never really thought that anybody would care about it. There used to be a really big divide between astrology and esotericism. So whenever Austin and I would go to astrology conferences like 16 years ago, we would be the only weird occultists, really. There might be like one talk on the Picatrix that like 8 people went to.
Right.
And there was actually a really strong Christian contingent at the time as well that kind of thought introducing magic to the whole thing broke it or was immoral in some way. And so to see that shift and to not have to walk in either world, choosing one, it's just really amazing to get to do both at once now and be open about that.
Yes, I can imagine. Kaitlin, I want to thank you for spending this time with me talking about all things talismatic and talismanic. from Sphere Sundry, and obviously I recommend that anyone watching go and check out the website, which I'll link down below. Kaitlin, are there any final words that you'd like to put out for anyone watching?
I appreciate you. I appreciate your audience for hanging out with us. And certainly Sphere and Sundry's clients, I owe them a great debt that I constantly try to repay with the quality of magic that I'm possibly able to provide them. And it's a great honor, the honor of my life to do this work, and such a privilege. And I just thank everyone who's part of it, and thank the powers that be for seeing to all that this is. And thank you again so much.
You're doing a fantastic job, Kaitlin, and I'm so privileged to have you on the channel. Thank you so much once again. I hope
It was
to
great to
speak
meet
to you
you.
very soon.